everybody. Welcome to today's book talk. Today, we're going to be discussing Rewiring Democracy, how AI will transform our politics, government, and citizenship. My name is Alice Marwick. I'm the Director of Research at Data and Society, and I'm going to moderate this conversation today. This event is supported by assistant producer Tunika Onekikami and our Network Engagement Associate, Areti Akinrenade. And for those who are joining a DNS event for the first time, Data and Society is an independent research institute studying the social implications of data and automation. And we produce original research and regularly convene multidisciplinary thinkers to challenge the power and purpose of technology in society. So thanks everyone for joining us today. So I'd like to introduce our two wonderful guests, the co-authors of Rewiring Democracy, Bruce Schneier and Nathan E. Sanders. So Bruce Schneier is an internationally renowned security technologist and the New York Times bestselling author of 14 books, including Data and Goliath and A Hacker's Mind. He is a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, a board member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or the EFF, and chief of security architecture at Inrupt, Inc. Nathan E. Sanders is a data scientist focused on making policymaking more participatory. And his research spans machine learning, astrophysics, public health, and environmental justice, which is a broad swath of things, I have to say, Nathan. So welcome to both of you, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thanks for convening this.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to both of you about this book. So let's just kind of set the stage. You open the book by situating AI in this sort of long history of technology's relationship to democracy. So Nathan, let's start with you. What mistakes from the social media era do you think that we risk repeating with AI?
And his answer is
Well,
going to be all of them.
I was going to say it's not a small list, and I know we can't go through all of it. I think the one I would start with, and I probably don't have to say a lot about because I know this audience is very, intimately, and I'm sure a lot of folks on this call have led a lot of the research and policy recommendation making around this, and that's data privacy. I think the way that AI developers are really improving, and I think in some cases really making tools more useful today, is largely by integrating more context from all of us about our lives and our work that makes those tools work better, but also exposes our data and creates a greater threat to data privacy in a way that's similar to and maybe even more severe than with social media. We never solved that problem for social media, certainly here in the US where we're based, and we definitely haven't solved it for AI either. But let me move beyond that one because I know folks are already so familiar with it. And let me call out as well the extent to which we're allowing both social media companies in the past and AI companies today to really externalize some of the damage that is done to society when their tools are misused or even used as they're intended. With social media, I think we've seen a coarsening of our political debate based on some of the incentives, some of the ways that social media algorithms are optimized for engagement. Great for the companies, not necessarily great for society, and we haven't really imposed upon the corporations to better align those incentives. But there are ways that we could do that. We point to the recent digital advertising services tax in Maryland as a great example of how a government can try and force companies to internalize some of the costs, at least some of the costs that are created when their technology harms society. And I think there's an opportunity for us to do that with AI and to try and direct those revenues towards things that are more supportive of society.
So, Bruce, in retrospect, social media was really sold as a democratizing force. We were all present in the sort of like late 90s, early aughts, like utopian, discourse around tech. What makes AI different, or are we just centralizing power under cover of this kind of democratizing narrative? Is this just a repeat? You're on mute.
Totally rookie mistake in 2025. Crazy. All right. You said the word that matters, power. Right? To the extent that a technology increases power imbalances, it's bad for society.
Yeah.
And if you think about social media, in the early years, it was democratizing. I mean, that's the color revolutions. That's when the people are using it to organize in ways they couldn't before. Traditional power was slow to figure out social media, but when they figured it out, they were able to magnify their even greater power. And now we're in a world where the powerful are using it to get more powerful. AI is similar in a lot of respects. And to the extent that we allow that power to concentrate in a few companies, in a few Silicon Valley companies, it's going to have the same results. Where it could be different and where we have hope of difference, well, we have hope we can do different policy, but in the tech, that the cost of building an AI engine is going down dramatically.
Yeah.
And I think it'll continue to go down. If it does, if it becomes not unreasonable for smaller countries, for many different companies, for organizations of all kinds to build their own AI, then it will be democratizing. Then we will see more distribution of power. If it is, OpenAI, Meta, Google, and a couple of others, it's going to be just like social media.
I mean, what's interesting to me is that so much of the discourse around AI is about the technology, but what you're talking about is really the political economy of AI, right? Like the ownership, the consolidation, the small number of companies.
I mean, I think we know that from social media as well. It's
Yeah.
not the tech. I mean, the tech doesn't require surveillance. The business model requires surveillance. We decide how that tech is implemented in the world. And we talk about in our book lots of examples of AI being used for good and some examples of AI being used for bad. And it's not the AI. Right? The AI it's the humans who are choosing to use it for either good or bad. And AI is going to be no different than anything else in that respect.
Yeah. All right, so let's move into some of these sort of more concrete examples to kind of ground this discussion. So you describe how AI is sort of reshaping all these different branches of government or all these sort of democratic institutions, right? Executive, legislative, judicial, and sort of civic life. Could one of you share a concrete example of how one of these institutions is being rewired by AI?
Yeah, happy to. There's one that Bruce and I were just reading more about because so much has happened even since we wrote about this example in our book. And what I'm thinking of is the judicial system and specifically what's unfolding in Brazil right now.
Hmm.
So Brazil has a society that's arguably even more litigious than we Americans are. My understanding is that there are typically about 7 million lawsuits that are processed through the Brazilian judicial system every year. And they historically have had a large and growing backlog of those cases. And it's such a massive issue that Brazil annually spends, as I understand it, about 1% of their GDP on the judicial system to process those lawsuits, and another 1% of their GDP paying out penalties assessed against the government when it is found to be liable in a lawsuit. So there's an enormous cost. And so, because of that situation, not surprisingly, Brazil's been one of the earliest adopters of AI technologies to try and improve the efficiency of that process, to improve the efficiency of their equivalent of the Attorney General's office, to defend the government, to prioritize cases, to assign the resources to, as well as the efficiency of the legal process itself in managing the caseload, reviewing case documents, helping judges reach decisions, et cetera. And they've now reported, actually since we wrote our book, that they have actually been successful in leveraging these efficiencies to significantly reduce their caseload.
Hmm.
But at the same time, they're observing that litigants are also using AI to automate the process of filing cases and generating the legal paperwork involved. And so they're also seeing now a trailing rise in the number of cases. And the big question, as AI is rewiring the judicial sector of Brazil, is who's going to win in this race and how are those dynamics going to change over time?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we see this in so many different elements, right? Like employment, you have like bots talking to bots, and it sounds like what you're talking about is the same kind of thing happening in sectors of government as well, which is, I think, a little bit more concerning because there's a lot more on the line there. So in the book, you put forth this sort of these four R's, the resist, responsible, reform, and renovate. They kind of give us like a moral grammar for democratic AI. Can you walk us through what those four R's are?
All right, so I'll do the first two, and I'll pass the second two to Nathan. The first is resist. There's a lot of bad uses of AI that we as society need to resist. If AI is racist or sexist or homophobic, and any of these biases that we see, we need to call them out and resist the uses. A lot of examples of AI being used badly. At the same time, there are examples of AIs being used well, and we need to actually use them. One we mentioned in the book is automatic language translation.
Hmm.
In a country like the United States, where it's people of speaking so many different languages, and we now can offer government services in everybody's native language. And that feels like an unfettered win for democracy. And I worry that, especially amongst people who are skeptics, who see all the bad things, fail to see the good things. And there are places we can use AI to make democracy better. The notion of AI helping in the legal system is really powerful. I mean, the first stories were about AIs making up stuff in briefs. But that is just one piece of what's possible. Some of the things Nathan mentioned about Brazil isn't generative AI, aren't chatbots. It's AIs being used to schedule things more efficiently. AIs being used to map, uh, attorneys with cases. And these are all wins. I mean, ways that are making government better. And I'll pass Nathan for the second two.
Yeah, the third R in our four R's framework is to reform the ecosystem of AI. We as a society need to actively be shaping how AI is developed and used and how that will be done in the future. And part of that involves working through government. Part of that involves having legislation that forces regulation of AI companies. Obviously, some jurisdictions are much farther along in that than others. We would love to see the US catch up more. But it needs to involve, in our view, more than just regulation. We think it also involves the government and civil society both contributing to AI development to demonstrate an example of how it could be done better and to offer alternatives to corporate AI systems. We advocate in the book and in our other writings for the government to actually participate in AI development, to produce what we call public AI, to actually provide a meaningful alternative to the corporate AI system that is built under democratic control and with oversight ultimately of the voters. So that's reform. And the last of the four R's is to renovate our democracy. And Bruce and I were in discussion at the Ash Center yesterday at an event with Daniel Allen, whose Allen Lab is entirely focused on this topic and has been long before so much attention has been brought to AI, because we already know that in the US and everywhere else, there are many reforms that we could do to improve the basic democratic processes that we write about in our book. And in general, those renovations are not specific to AI, and that's exactly as it should be because our the reason AI is posing a threat to democracy is generally that it is changing the dynamics of existing political processes, and the solution to that does not have to be specific to AI. We argue that it shouldn't be. It should be governing the behaviors of all the actors in those systems, whether or not they're using AI in their work.
I mean,
And
I
this is
think
an
it's,
example.
oh,
This
sorry,
is an
Bruce, go
example
ahead.
of AI not really making things different, but just making existing things worse, right? It's exacerbating existing problems.
Yeah. I mean, I think the difficulty with all of these prescriptions is that we're in a very anti-regulatory moment and we're facing an administration that thinks of AI as like a tool of empire, basically, right? As like a way to sort of promote American economy and American industry elsewhere. Like, given that, how can, people like researchers or civic technologists or, well-meaning policymakers, like, how can they participate in these kinds of 4 Rs? Like, what is available to us right now in our toolbox?
Uh, well, we're not looking for the U.S. to lead,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the EU is the regulatory superpower on the planet, and they have passed the EU AI Act.
Yeah.
It is the first comprehensive AI regulation on the planet. And we can argue about the details, and we do in the book. We talk about some of the details we don't like, but they're trying and they're doing it. In the United States, look to the states. California has passed several serious AI regulations. A lot more to go. Nathan mentioned Maryland, just a few minutes ago. So it's not just AI, but I think, right, the US federal government has abdicated its regulatory responsibility writ large. I think we have to look elsewhere and not give up hope.
And I would just add to that that of course there is an underlying political problem here that makes it hard for us to do the kinds of renovations and reforms that we think are the right ones. I totally agree with that. So I think we should recognize that AI is increasingly at issue in our politics, and maybe in a way that, at least in the US, our politicians, campaigns, parties haven't really caught up with. I think we need to really grapple with the issues that AI is creating for our society in our politics. We see some examples of that. I mean, the most visible one in the US has probably been Andrew Yang really putting a spotlight on the economic changes to be brought by AI in the 2020 campaign. I'm not saying that his solutions are the right one, but I think actually putting a spotlight on that issue, using it
Mhm.
as a political tool and organizing renovation and other reforms around it is the right approach. So we would like to see more of that. And as well, leveraging AI in movement building and campaigning. Again, this isn't happening a lot in the US right now, but it is happening elsewhere in the world. In Europe, there's a multinational political party called Volt that has a digital democracy platform and is small and is just getting started. But I think it's demonstrating what it looks like to build a platform around AI and how it can be used responsibly in governance. And in Japan, we just saw the election to their upper chamber, to effectively the Senate of the Japanese Diet, who ran on a very digital democracy oriented platform,
Mm.
used AI as a tool of campaigning to answer questions from thousands of voters and use their feedback to develop part of the political platform of his party in a way that I think is really refreshing and interesting
Mhm.
as a future direction for politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think in the US, when people talk about democracy, they kind of just presume like US democratic traditions or US governance. But in the book, you grapple with democracy in many forms around the world. So how did you kind of handle that? How did you approach writing a book that does speak to those multiple democratic traditions? And you gave us a few examples already, but what do you see emerging globally in how governments and citizens are shaping AI in sort of non-US contexts?
It's interesting. We're really looking at what's being done today, what's possible, and then what we can expect from the future. And sort of necessarily, we find examples, wherever they are, right? So it's
Yeah.
not a book about US democracy. It's a book about the technology of democracy,
Hmm.
which really led us to other countries where there's actually more innovation. We have a pretty moribund democracy in the United States, and there are other countries that are more willing to experiment and more willing to do things uh, that are helpful. Also, a lot of these countries are smaller. So I
Yeah.
guess some are bigger. I mean, like some are big, like we talk think about Brazil, the EU, but some countries are smaller, which makes them more nimble. I mean, Taiwan has been a country who's been in the forefront of digital democracy. So, we're looking for good examples wherever they happen, and in the process of writing, things are popping up all the time. It's not uncommon for us to write a section to talk about the future, and then like 2 months later in the writing process, we need to, okay, the future is now. Here's the example. So that was a kind of an exciting writing process, a little bit terrifying because we're sort of writing this as it happens. And I forget the second half of your question, so I'll make Nathan answer it.
Oh boy, I need a refresher if you didn't already
It
comprehend.
was, what do you see emerging globally in how governments and citizens are shaping AI, like for a non-US context?
We see so many great examples. I know we've touched on a few. I'll try and inject a new one here. Bruce and I are really excited about the new development out of Switzerland just in the past few weeks, where they have released a model that I think is the best implementation of what we've described as public AI that's come out to date. Switzerland has just released a model called Apertus, which was developed by the Swiss government in collaboration with ETH Zurich with civil society. It is entirely open source in code, in data, in its development process. It is now released free to the world as a public good. There's a online version that you can use for free that's available to everybody. And now we have this amazing base public AI model, which is fully transparent and under democratic control that others can now both use and modify. That's exactly the vision that we had for public AI. As Bruce said, it was a vision when we wrote the book. There are some smaller examples we could cite, but now it exists and it's out there, and we hope other governments will learn from that example and do things that are even bigger and better.
That's great. So normally, if you just go and Google like AI and democracy, you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff around like deep fakes and misinformation, right? Like that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I say this coming from New York, where Andrew Cuomo put out a very poorly very poor judgment video, an anti-Mom Donnie video that was clearly AI generated, which is one of many gaffes he'd made through the campaign. Why is it important for us to sort of move past these kinds of, I think they're almost surface level concerns and focus on these structural changes to democratic processes?
I wouldn't use the word move past. I think we have to
Okay.
engage with it as well. But I think we have to not only engage with it. And if we only see AI as misinformation, as propaganda, or as extractive, or as biased, we're not going to be open to the promise, to the good things it can do, and we're also not going to steer it, right? We're going to withdraw. We withdraw, that's how the capitalists win.
Yeah.
That by understanding what's possible, what's good, we can say, hey, we want more of this good stuff in addition to less of the bad stuff.
If I can add to that, we try and analyze in the book what is it that makes AI different as a technology, and we try and sort of unfold its impacts on democracy through that lens and what are its special capabilities. And we don't see the propagation of misinformation or even the generation of false information, false videos, false images as what is special about AI. We've had technologies to make fake images and even videos for a very long time. We've had technologies to propagate misinformation and to generate misinformation for a very long time. But there are other capabilities of AI that we think really are unique and differentiating and special. And we try and analyze what those are, and then throughout the book, tie back what we think is going to change about democracy to the specific characteristics of AI.
So let's drill down into that. What do you think are some of these specific things about AI that it can do, these capacities or capabilities that really are like, I don't know if I want to say era defining, but like really distinct from previous types of technologies?
So we talk about four. I mean, broadly, and by AI, I don't mean chatbots.
Yeah.
I don't mean generative AI. I mean the broad systems of computing that in some way mirror humans. A lot of the good AI we're talking about are decision-making AIs, right? Not speaking AIs. The AI that drives your car is not a chatbot. So we list four specific areas where this AI could be better than a human. It could be faster, so speed. Trained people are way better at detecting spam in your email, but there are billions of emails per second. Humans can't do that. The speed of the AI matters here, even though it's less effective. The second is scale. Right? AIs can scale to at a level that humans can't. And the risk of AI chatbots doing propaganda is just the scale of them, right? We can get millions of them. Whereas I can't have a million propagandists on Facebook spouting propaganda. I just can't do it. So speed, scale. The third is scope. The broad scope of AI can make it uniquely qualified. And here chatbots are an example, right? This is the scope of their knowledge, their ability to communicate, their ability to speak on a variety of issues. No single human can match. And then the last one is sophistication.
Mm.
There are some areas where the AI is just a more sophisticated actor. The game of chess and the game of Go is an easy example. Right? They play those games at a superhuman sophistication. So when you see a need in any of those four areas, we can imagine, envision, and have an AI replacing a human, even though like the AI isn't generally intelligent or better in every way. But those four specific ways, speed, scale, scope, and sophistication, are how to think about AI doing human tasks.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, we're at this moment of techlash, right? Where there's a lot of anti-AI public sentiment that is really pronounced, right? And at DNS, we've kind of, there's a pretty strong like AI abolitionist perspective in many of the people who work here. And I think we're kind of past the point where that's like like a realistic end goal. But because I think you guys are a little bit more optimistic than that perspective, what gives you confidence that AI could be used to strengthen democracy rather than erode it?
I think because we see examples of where it is being used effectively, and that gives us hope that we as a society can make better choices about how and where to use the technology and also where not to use it to steer the future of our democracy in a good way. I'll just give one example that I'm personally involved in that we write about in the book that we are doing here in Massachusetts. We've built a engagement tool to help our legislature engage with constituents, help constituents submit legislative testimony and help shape our policymaking process. Of course, Massachusetts has a 400-year-old legislature. It predates the founding of the American Republic. We've had ways for citizens to participate in policymaking for a long time. But technology, I think, legitimately makes this a more accessible process. We haven't taken advantage of that in Massachusetts in the past, and so we've gotten together a volunteer group of civic technologists to try and build something that's useful to people, that makes it as easy to submit testimony to the right committee in our legislature as it is to leave a comment on a website. And AI has been helpful to us in this process. We have
Hmm.
8,000 bills filed in the Massachusetts legislature every session, each of which is often like hundreds of pages of legalese that no one is going to read or understand. And we found AI very useful for just automatically categorizing all that legislation to make it easy for people to find policies that are relevant for them, and also to summarize the content of that legislation to make it more accessible to people so that they can actually, understand and comprehend its provisions in order to articulate their response. I don't think by any means that a tool like this is a panacea for democracy. Of course, it's not. But we think AI is a tool that is legitimately useful to make this little piece of our democratic process better. In our book, we try and look for as many examples like that from around the world as we can.
So I will also shout out California. There's an organization called Cal Matters, and they basically track legislators in California. They track their voting records, they track their campaign contributions, they track their public utterances, floor speeches, campaign emails, tweets, and make that information available to citizens and journalists who want to find out what their representatives are doing. And they're using AI to help sift that information, to make sense of it, to flag inconsistencies that a human journalist might well look into. There might be a story there. So here again, both of these examples, the AI is an assistive tool into a very human process. And that really feels like the good part of AI assisting democracy. Democracy is fundamentally a human process. How can this tool make this human process better in some way?
So, for those of us who are in the US, which is, DNS is a US based organization, you guys are both based in the United States. Where do you think the points of intervention are for, you know, people who don't work at, Anthropic or Meta or OpenAI, maybe people who are researchers, activists, civic technologists? Like, where can we make a difference? Because I do think we are in some ways at this like kind of fulcrum. Like, is there a particular way that people can get involved, or what can people do at this point?
And I mean, so I'm speaking to, I think, is an audience of researchers and activists and practitioners. And we know through the decades of tech and policy that it's not a campaign issue. This will not be a campaign issue in the same way that we all wish digital privacy was a
Yeah.
campaign issue for maybe a couple of decades. But we have made progress on tech issues, and we make them by directly trying to influence individual legislators. Some of us testify, some of us advise legislators, some of us advise executive branch. I mean, I'm assuming a functional government, right? I'm assuming a government that wants a democracy. So, I mean, like in a lot of ways, there are problems above our pay grade here. But assuming that we're in a functional democracy, there are things we can do, and we have done. I mean, we as tech advocates have not been complete failures over the past 20 years, but it's not by mobilizing voters. Right? It turns out this is not a campaign issue.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I think there is a certain number of people who might want it to be.
I want it to be. We probably everybody in this Zoom wants it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nathan, sorry, you want to jump in?
Yes, I agree with you both, and I do hope there's an opportunity for us to fight to put these issues front and center. Although, of course, we all acknowledge there are other issues that are also very important, and so there's always a balance to be achieved there. I'm thinking back to your first question as well, Alice, about what are the lessons that we can learn from social media. So I wanted to inject the point about monopolization here. We didn't intervene in a way that would prevent a very small number of Silicon Valley companies from monopolizing social media and also our attention and also the economy, the world economy at this point. And we do have a point of intervention today to try and prevent that from happening with the new generation of companies that are emerging into a big tech category. That's not an easy thing to do, of course, but I think now is the moment to try and make sure that what we hope are legitimately useful for society applications of AI accrue benefit to all of us and not just to the owners of a very small number of companies. I think that there's an opportunity to have a bipartisan agreement on at least that point. Maybe I'm not even saying that, but I think that there's an opportunity to bring people across the aisle to say we want a different outcome this time than we had for social media.
Yeah, let's hope so. We have some incredible audience questions. So I'm going to ask maybe two more questions of y'all, and then we'll go to the audience who have many very smart questions to ask us. So to each of you, if you had to choose one democratic institution, either in the US or elsewhere, to kind of renovate first to either with AI or to prepare for AI, what would it be and how would you change it?
I guess I'll start. I think there's a lot of value in AI assisting the delivery of government services writ large. We write about the AI assisting the patent office, which is horribly backlogged. We write about AI assisting, different regulatory agencies. And you think about AIs making decisions. We might not want that, but there are ways to make it work for people. So one of the examples we have in our book is our United States are awarding of disability benefits. That there is a enormous backlog. I think it's a 2-year backlog, and people die waiting for benefits. And we can imagine an AI making benefits decisions. But we also might say, well, we don't want an AI to deny people benefits uh, who might need them. So we'll build a system, and I'm kind of making this up on the fly, that will only say yes. So it takes the enormous backlog and it just makes the easy yeses and let people do the hard cases. Uh, we also talk about AI being used for regulatory compliance. Lots of documents come in and there aren't enough people to read them. AI can read the documents and say, hey, this one over here, the human should read this one. It feels a bit weird. Maybe there's something going on here. So I think in delivery of services done properly, AI can make government more efficient, more responsive without removing human agency.
So I want to push back a little bit here because I know a decent amount about AI and just general sort of algorithmic technologies being used for benefit distribution. And in the US, they're usually used to deny people benefits, right? In
Right.
the
So
same way
it's
that
by the rule that
insurance
make the rule you
companies
can't
will,
do that.
yeah,
Right.
but you can't
This is the
discount those
humans.
histories and that sort of power dynamics
Uh,
from the situation that we're in now, right? Like,
100%. I mean, right. We might lack the political will to do that. I mean, for a lot of people, the whole point of benefits administration is to deny,
yes.
right? And AI is assistive tech. AI can deny benefits faster than any human. It also can award benefits faster than a human. But if I'm going to pick something to reform, I want humans who want to reform the system for good to use the technology. Right? The technology is not going to change the human motivations.
Yeah. Yeah. Nathan, same question.
Yeah, I think the process I am most eagerly seeking to reform through my own work and through our writing in the book is the process of all of us participating in democracies as citizens, as residents, as stakeholders of democracies. I'm part of a group of people who spends a lot of time going around to state legislators trying to say, we can make it easier for you to interact with constituents. And this isn't great to say, but the most common answer that we hear is, we don't want it to be easier to interact with the constituents. We're already overwhelmed. We have so many people calling our office, so many people submitting testimony. What are you doing? And to me, the answer to that legitimate concern should not be that fewer people should participate in democracy, or that we should put up barriers, or that we shouldn't try to make our democracy more inclusive and to include more voices. It has to be, how can we solve this problem as our society grows, as our populations grow, as our systems become more complex? How can we meet that challenge with a way to help everyone have a greater voice in democracy, to make it more participatory, to help all of us see the outcomes that we want from our democracy. And I think legitimately technology should play a role in that. We've used technology to help mitigate that process of participation from stakeholders in democracy for millennia. And we see AI as just the next step in a chain of many, many technologies that are involved in that process. And we're trying to figure out what is the most appropriate role, what is the safest role, what is the most pro-democratic role that AI can play in that. That's led us to some of the work that we're doing at Maple here in Massachusetts, and some of the many other examples like Cal Matters that we discuss in the book.
Okay, I'm going to turn things over to audience Q&A. If you have, I know it's a little bit early, but I really want to get to some of these questions because they're really good. To everybody listening, if you have a Q&A, please press the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and put your questions in there rather than in the chat, and then I can make sure that I see them. All right, so this is a question from Sam McDonald who says, I'm concerned that the use of technology for constituent engagement and policymaking is only going to perpetuate the idea of, look, we are listening to you without representatives actually listening. Instead, AI reinforces and legitimizes this perception of listening without it being a true reality. Of course, AI may help people get more informed, but will that sway representatives of government to pay more attention?
It's a good question. And we can say the same thing about town halls, the same thing
Yeah.
about writing letters, and the same thing about every way we try to engage with policymaking. If the humans we elect don't care, no technology will fix that.
Okay, I guess that is true. Yes, we do not want to
I mean,
point to
I
techno
wish it was different.
solutionism as, yeah, yeah. All right, so our next question is from Carol Chach. I work on climate issues and on climate justice. How is it not unconscionable to use extra energy wherever it isn't highly crucial and undoable by any other means? Perhaps to solve huge human needs like ending cancer, but it's burning the planet, and data plants or data centers are located in disadvantaged communities, polluting their air and water. And this is something that I think we see the climate impacts of of data centers are becoming like more immediate, and people in different communities around the country are really and around the world are really grappling with these and pushing back. Is there sort of an ethical thing here? Like we should only use AI for these kind of life-saving things rather than maybe some of these more humdrum or mundane concerns?
I think Carol gets it exactly right with this question. And to me, this comes back to one of the first things that we discussed of should we as a society allow technology companies, particularly AI companies, to saddle us with the externalities of the harms that they cause? And particularly when they're highly localized. You know, all the examples that we've seen of data centers, mineral extraction, other resources that are necessary for the AI industry being concentrated on one polity that didn't choose to have it concentrated on them. My view is that we shouldn't allow that, and I agree with the question. But I would also want to call out that I think Carol's right in kind of framing it. Is the benefit worth the environmental cost? I think that's always the calculation we should make. In some cases, the answer is no. And I want to argue for the fact that in many cases, I think the answer is yes. So, for example, I am very involved in the environmental advocacy community here in Massachusetts. I was in a conversation with some staff at a local organization here a few weeks ago. And what I urge them to think about is, as they're considering using AI for some of their work, including policy making and advocacy work, if they think it's going to advance their mission, if it's going to be a useful tool for them, I want them to use it. I want them to benefit from it. I want them to be, use it to help them make their society, our society better. To me, it's no different from, for example, should they use a car to travel to an event where they're going to participate in a town hall? Should they use a boat to go out onto a river and sample for water quality? Those things also create pollution, and I think you should use them. I think the last point I want to make is that I think sometimes we overestimate the energy cost of our own use of AI in those cases where we find value in it. You can run a pretty effective AI model, even specifically a large language model today, with the computing capacity of your phone, which you have on all the time, used for lots of other things. I wouldn't think of using AI in a radically different way. I wonder if Carol has particularly in mind maybe the comparison between the energy cost of Google search with or without an AI supported feature. I think that's the right kind of comparison. I think we should be asking, should we all be opted in automatically to be using AI search every time? Maybe not. But if you have a specific use case for AI that's going to help you advance your mission or your organization's mission, and you see value to it, I don't think you should hesitate to use it for that use case. I don't think you're going to be using it at a scale that for example, is similar to making a car trip. In general, a car trip is going to be equivalent to thousands and thousands of queries against a large language model, for example.
And I think it's important to think of this in terms of compared to what. And when we
Yeah.
look at an AI system and what it does and whether we should use it compared to what. And if the system we would use otherwise could easily be worse. And I want to hold these replacement systems up to the same standards as the systems they're replacing and not think of them in isolation. If we're not going to use the AI for a thing, we're going to do it some other way. And that'll have some cost. Or we'll choose not to do it, which will have some other cost. And that's the comparison's really vital.
All right, next question is actually in the chat, but I'm going to take it anyway because it's really interesting. It's from Elena Kromova, and she says, "How can we use this technology for activism, i.e., assuming the government is not an ally but an adversary?"
Oh, I love this question because I think we're seeing great examples around the
And
world of
we have lots of
activism.
examples. You go.
Yeah. I'll just give one, and Bruce, I'll turn it to you. We write in the book about the example of in Brazil, there's a tool whose name is in Portuguese. I believe the English translation is Operation Love Serenade. And this activist group built a tool that just automatically audited financial transaction statements from the Brazilian government and would send out a tweet when they found something anomalous. They turned this into sort of an AI automated watchdog tool. And we give the number in the book, but I think it led to of order 600 corruption cases being filed in Brazil. This is an example of activists totally from the grassroots level building a tool to help monitor corruption in government and having some impact.
We're also seeing examples of AI being used to help citizens organize. We talk about unions using AI tools to help coordinate their members, to help groups reach consensus, to help moderate discussions. There are a lot of examples of AI being used as a way for humans to be more effective in groups. Now, again, if you think about this, I'm sure human moderators are still way better than AI moderators, but human moderators are hard to find. And we can put an AI moderator in, I'm going to make this up, every subreddit, which would probably be good for society. So it is the scale here that makes the AI effective, uh, even if the human might be better in each individual instance. But lots of great examples of AI being used for human organizing.
Mhm. All right, so this is an interesting question. It's from anonymous attendee. I am a PhD student. I have
I know
brought
that person.
Yeah. I have brought the speed, scale, and scope problematics to several historians and sociologists of technology at my university, and most, if not all, have seemingly thrown these out as defining. There seems to be a temptation, even among scholars critical of AI, to other it, to define it as other from previous technologies at all costs. Why do scholars seem averse to these explanations, and what explains this othering impulse? This is a very academic question, which
Yeah,
is
I'm not
why
sure
I
we
took
know.
it.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. I I I I know for some of the communities that I'm in that AI is thought of as different because of what I think of as the original sin problem. That chatbots are trained on copyrighted material. They're trained extractively, right? They're trained against the will of those who wrote or drew or created the material that made the AI what it is. And because of that, nothing good can come from it, right? It's the fruit of the poison tree in US legal terms. I think that drives a lot of naysayers. And I mean, right, they're not wrong. But our point is we can do it differently. That is an economic choice to create AI in that extractive manner. Right? The Swiss did not do that. Other groups are not doing that. We don't have to do that. That is not the technology, that's the humans.
And I would just add to that the reason why we came to this conclusion of laying out the sort of specialized capabilities of AI in terms of speed, scale, scope, and sophistication, it was very intentional. Notice, for example, that none of those criteria are better or performance. We don't believe that AI is broadly better than, for example, a human or another system that might replace. But in some cases, it can be, or it can at least be more useful. And we think that always comes back to, at least in in our thinking through this, it always comes back to one of those four key elements. It's better in this use case because it can be so much faster. It's better in another use case because it can be more sophisticated. And if I can actually just unpack this sophistication piece for a minute, we try and define that very precisely in the book. To us, sophistication, again, it does not mean better. It simply means that AI is able to take into account more factors than a human could. It can consider more inputs simultaneously than a human could. In some cases, that's useful. In other cases, it's not, and it doesn't lead to better performance. And that's why we think that not quality, not being better, but rather speed, scale, scope, and sophistication are the defining attributes of AI.
All right, so next guest is from Meg Young, who's at DNS. She says, are there any aspects of using AI for public engagement that give you pause? Collaborators and I are concerned about the properties of large language models that sand off outliers in a data set in a way that may mute minoritized perspectives.
I think that's absolutely right. And there certainly are ways to apply AI badly, to be sure, in a way that doesn't actually improve citizen participation. I'll give an example. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with the DeepMind project to develop what's called the Habermas machine as an experiment in using AI to facilitate uh, policy development among many human users in an automated way is really interesting. And they developed metrics to try and decide, is this working as well as a human moderator would or not? And those metrics included, do folks who have a minority view in that discussion, do they feel represented in the synthesized output of the discussion? I think that's really important. For them, the definition of working well is not that you get to a point of consensus. It's not that you get to a homogenization. It includes consideration of our minority views included.
So this question, I think, gets at, there's been some other questions in the chat, and I think this one sort of gets at some of the tension I think some people are seeing. And this is from Solha Lee. Efforts to regulate AI and efforts to actively discover and use its positive aspects in governance seem difficult to pursue simultaneously. Until we come up with and realize a better ecosystem than the current business model and political economy, it feels the efforts to use AI for governance are a bit premature, given they might ingrain the current political economy and technical architecture into public systems. What do you suggest in addressing this tension?
I think both Nathan and I can speak to that. I mean, I think there's a lot of easy wins. One thing we talk about, I mean, I mentioned it here before, is automatic language translation. I mean, that is an easy win, and I think it's, unconscionable not to make government available in all the local languages of your citizens. Now, I think there are, I mean, structural things about U.S. democracy and democracies around the world that I think you're right. We risk ossifying them by making them part of the tech instead of part of the humans. But I think there's a lot of things we can do, and I think we need to do them. I don't know, Nathan, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's a very real tension. I agree with the commenter. But I also would call out that we have to grapple with the fact that this transformation is already happening. And I
Mhm.
think the choice we face is actually not will government use AI or not, but it's will we try and take a part in shaping it or not. I'll give you an example, and I'm going to make this a little bit of a caricature. Forgive me just for effect, but basically, Microsoft rolled out an update to Office products a couple of years ago that put AI in the hands of the workflow of every government and every government civil servant in the U.S. and around the world. These technologies are being rolled out very widely, and we know that civil servants and others in democratic processes have real problems to solve that they're finding useful to address with AI. We gave the example of the Brazilian judiciary system earlier, where both the litigants and the sort of government operators of the judicial system have a problem that they need to solve, and they're finding a way to solve it with AI. We need to recognize that is happening. It's going to continue happening, and we want to try and shape that in a positive way. That's why I think we really need to pay attention to these issues and try and intervene wherever we can, and also chart a vision for what it could look like to do this well.
So this is, I think, a good follow-up question. This comes from Mike. All right, Mike. The technical context around AI development is obviously very complex, and I have seen in my work that it isn't always the easiest thing to translate democratic or social values and interests into technical changes. Just wondering if Nathan and Bruce have any perspectives or insight to offer on how to effectively include social perspectives into AI systems or how to organize, quote, participatory AI development?
Well, again, I think this comment is right too, and it's a big question that I don't have a perfect solution to. But I'll tell you one thing I would just love to see, and to us, this is one of the main differences that we see between the way corporate AI is being developed today and how we would like this to work, which is that the largest AI companies really don't have any obligation to be meaningfully responsive to public input, and in general, they don't have any process for people to really provide that input. So the social inputs that you're describing, yes, it is difficult to translate them, but I think the starting point is let's have some forcing function that makes the AI companies pay attention to us, consider that public input. And if the corporations are not going to do it, or if our political systems aren't going to allow for that, let's have an alternative. Let's find another way to develop AI that doesn't rely on corporations who have economic incentives, structural incentives under capitalism to make good choices. And again, that's why we think about public AI. That's why we think about the role that other governments, not only the US, and also civil society have in building alternatives.
And we don't think of public AI as a replacement for corporate AI. We
Mm,
think of it as something else that'll be in the mix. That right now we have no choice but to use AI by these for-profit corporations. But now that we're seeing a Swiss model, and there are other, Singapore has a model that is optimized for Southeast Asian languages, that this shows people that there are alternatives. And the hope is that by demonstrating other ways to do things, that the private companies are now incentivized to do some of that themselves
mm.
because there is an alternative, because there is a marketplace. And I mean, I agree with Nathan that this isn't really the tech here. It is the social and economic systems that decide how the tech works.
All right, so let me look. We have some new questions in the chat. Okay, so I'm just going to ask this question because it has a few upvotes, even though I'm pretty sure I know the answer. Do either of the authors have a connection or income from any profit-making company related to the development or rollout of AI?
Yes, I do. I work at Harvard University, and Harvard is leveraging AI in all sorts of ways for educational purposes. And we also have some revenue generating parts of our university, including publishers that are using AI as well.
It's a
I was
very
going to say the
ethical
same
response.
thing. I teach at Harvard. I'm also a part of a company called Inrupt. So I'll give a little bit of example. Tim Berners-Lee invented the web. He also has a system for distributed data ownership. The idea being that your data, instead of being owned by Facebook and I don't know, your data is on Fitbit and your thermostat data is here, that you would put all of your data in your pod, he calls it, or your wallet, as we call it, and then you would have control of it. So the notion that we could take data out of ownership of all these big companies and give it to people. We are leveraging AI to allow people to use that data. Right? Now that they have it, can they gain insight from it? So yes, so we are trying to use AI there as well, in addition to Harvard.
Okay, well, thank you both. I just wanted to, I didn't want to be accused of not answering that
This is
question
good. No
because
one's
of
ever
like
asked us this before.
nefarious means. All right, so question from Mary Madden. She says, it seems that the vision of, quote, public AI is kind of an artisanal form of cleaner AI that is still going to largely be built and maintained by tech and government elites. For the average internet user, how do we help democratize access in a way that gives us influence over questions of design and iteration to ensure that it truly serves constituents? Why should citizens trust these models when the dominant mental models of AI have been shaped by the original sins of extractive and exploitive big tech platforms?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's a good challenge. To me, the fundamental difference between the opportunity to develop AI under democratic control, meaning within democratic governments, and under the model that's prevalent today, which is a corporate model, is that uh, it is under democratic control. There's an ultimate accountability to voters. And that is a incredibly imperfect process for all the reasons that Mary listed. I agree. It does still rest the development of AI with technical elites. That's right. Our government leverages technical elites to solve all sorts of technical and scientific problems. I view that as similar to, the development here in the US of organizations like NIST, the National Institutes of Standards, NASA, yes, we do need to leverage discrete technical skills to develop this. And to me, the question is, will we prefer that those sort of technical elites only be doing that work in a for-profit context, where they're responsible primarily, if not only, to capitalist incentives? Or will we also like an alternative version of that, where there's democratic oversight, accountability to voters, and political control? And they're both imperfect, for sure. My interest is in diversifying the ecosystem. I think it's valuable to at least have both.
And politics matters as well. I mean, we're talking about trust. Do we trust this technical system? And now, we have all these examples of having to trust a corporation. But, which government? I mean, we talk about this Swiss model. We all kind of trust Switzerland, but maybe some of us don't. Let's say Russia produces a public AI model. Are you going to use it? You might not. But the importance is we have a mix of these models in our ecosystem, that you have a choice. And you can choose to trust an EU model or a Swiss model or American model or a Canadian model or a model that's coming out of a university or a consortium of I don't know, sub-Saharan African nations that have banded together and built a model. And I want all these possibilities because right now we don't have much of a choice.
I mean, I really like sort of ending on this somewhat like optimistic note. And so I would love it if just to kind of finish our conversation. So let's say we're looking down the road at democracy in 10 years and we have like a kind of best case scenario of AI being used and like a worst case scenario of AI being used. What do each of those look like? And let's start with the worst case first so that we can end on the best case.
I mean, the worst case is the fascist hellhole, and right? Uh, that's not an AI problem,
Yeah.
but AI can be used to exacerbate all the political issues that are causing those problems, right? AI will make spying more efficient. AI will make it more efficient to figure out who to arrest and who to deport and who to investigate. All of those things. I mean, government wants to single out you, they push a button, and AI produces a bunch of spurious charges that kind of just barely make sense. Right? It's not the AI, it's the people. But AI can make the worst of everybody even more worst. That's not grammatical.
I understood what you meant. All right, Nathan.
I'll just sort of add the economic and corporate angle to this, which is that I think to me the worst case scenario is kind of an extrapolation from where we are now, which is that a very small number of companies, have the wealth that outstrips all but the largest nation states and grow ever larger, and a very small number of people are benefiting from that, and their livelihoods are tied up in extraction from us of our data, of monetizing our use of these tools, and that they become only available to elites because they're monetized in such a way that makes this, you know this technology that's increasingly part of our infrastructure only available to an elite few because it's so expensive. And I think an alternative to that is one where we try and redistribute the benefits that are created by the technology when it can be applied to useful means broadly throughout society. We make the technology universally available so that activists as well as government elites can both use it to support their work. And I think we try and chart in the book a way that we can actually achieve that kind of vision, and we try and point to what that looks like.
And the key there is that it decentralizes power. I mean, to the extent this technology decentralizes power, it is better for democracy. And that's what we want it to do.
All right, on that note, thank you so much to Bruce Schneier and Nathan Sanders for joining us today for this book talk. And again, the book is Rewiring Democracy, How AI Will Transform Our Politics, Government, and Citizenship. And I believe that Areti put a link to bookshop.org to get a copy of it. Thanks again, Bruce and Nathan, for joining us. And thanks to all of our participants, listeners, and question askers.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
everybody.